Hello and welcome to another edition of Mailbag. What is Mailbag? Well, Mailbag is a feature of the channel where you guys leave lots of comments on the channel and I attempt to answer those comments, or if I can't answer those comments, I throw it out to you guys who have more knowledge on some of this stuff than I do. So let's get into the first mailbag of this session. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. Oh, next comment question comes from Gianluca Gadini, I think is how you pronounce that. It's always difficult when you get a YouTuber's name and it's not obvious where the cuts are. Anyway, this was in response to upgrading the Roland drivers for Mac OS Catalina 10.15. Now, Catalina, as we all know, has been around for quite a few years. In fact, I did this video in January 2020. And what Gianluca writes is, I'm looking for a driver to make my old Fantom X7 compatible with Catalina. And this has been a recurring theme of people asking questions on the channel. Now, I'm sure some enterprising Herbert out there will probably come up with a solution for this, but I'm not a coder and I haven't got a solution for this. And unfortunately, Roland, who make the Fantom X7, have a policy that if they discontinue a product, they will no longer provide updates to make them compatible with any future operating system updates. And this is particularly prevalent in the Apple Mac space. Not so much with Windows, because Windows tends to have a little bit more longevity in terms of, you know, Windows 7 to Windows 10, Windows 10 to Windows 11, etc., etc. And Microsoft have a policy of supporting the current version and one back. So currently in support is Windows 11 and Windows 10. So when Roland are writing drivers, they write them for Windows 10 and Windows 11. But with Mac, it's a quite slightly different thing, because Mac seem to do a fairly prominent upgrade once a year. And that becomes a bit of a pain for Roland. But what Roland tend to do is, if it's a current operating system and a current product, they will release a new driver set for the latest incarnation of the Mac. Now, you may get a driver set that says it's available for Mac's version 11, 12, 13, etc., etc. Okay, and I'm just using that as an example because that's not quite how it works. But what Roland do is they release, if the product is still available, then they will release a driver set for it, or confirm that the driver set that currently is there is compatible with that operating system version. Now, the biggest problem with Catalina was that while the Mac operating systems continue to support 32-bit drivers, you could kind of get away with using an earlier driver. But once they dropped support for the 32-bit environment, which they made a big hoo-ha around the whole kind of Catalina area, any instruments or peripherals that had support dropped to them prior to that date didn't get an update of the 32-bit driver to 64-bit. And basically it meant if you then upgraded your Mac to the latest version of the operating system it could support post Catalina, then effectively you were kind of stymied, because you couldn't get it to work. The driver was therefore not compatible. You really needed to remove the driver from Mac because it just wouldn't work. 32-bit had been removed from the environment. Now, Apple had made a number of security changes in the past which caused problems, but this is a game changer. So any piece of equipment written prior to the 32-bit support being dropped basically became completely useless. And it's one of the reasons why I actually have two Macs. Yeah, I have two. I have the Mac that I tend to work on here, which actually is a couple of major versions of OS out of date. And I've kind of kept it like that because I have stuff on there that I know won't be supported going forward, and I really don't want to test that one out yet. I will at some point buy a new Mac, which means I will probably have three. But this is a perennial problem with the Apple product line and Roland's stance. I really do think Roland should have bit the bullet and made a 64-bit driver for a lot of the old things, but that is their stance. You know, I wish a number of big named artists kind of stepped in and waded in on that. That may have changed them, but the little guys, the yous and me's of this world, unless you're going to stop buying Roland equipment, they ain't going to listen to you, or they haven't so far. Next comment question comes from MIDI Moog. And this wants to do with the Roland D-70, how to access the synthesizer restoration part 2 video I did in November 2024. And MIDI Moog writes, thank you for the reminder to be careful of the ribbon cables. Every time I open the D-70, something else goes wrong with the ribbon cables. This is one of those really interesting ones because one of the things I have seen is there is a problem with the connector, and the quick fix is to cut off the old connector and terminate a new connector. Job done. A lot of techs might do that. But actually what you do is you actually reduce the slack on the ribbon cable. And in a lot of cases there is not much slack on the ribbon cable in the first place. So you remove a little bit more, then you don't have as much wiggle room if you're trying to remove the ribbon cable for some reason, or even remove the case or remove a board, and that can cause lots of problems. And it then means you start to stress the cables and the connector, and then it fails, and then in some instances you just struggle to find a replacement. The ribbon cables per se are not necessarily a problem. It's the connectors that turn out to be the problem. And also the other side of this is, if you don't know the ribbon cable's at fault, you could be trying to diagnose an error that is actually being caused by the ribbon cable and a pin being ripped out of a connector. So, yes, always be careful when disconnecting ribbon cables, especially the plastic style ones that you get in some keyboards like the D-70. They are particularly susceptible to damage. And I've actually got a project on the bench at the moment which for some reason has, again, one of these plastic style connectors for some reason. I don't know why, but that's how they've chosen to do the connector from an input to the board. There you go. We weren't around when they designed these things.